Hello, and welcome to The Distillery. I'm Harry Lee Shanglun, your host, and today I'm joined by Ava Ahmedi, who is a musician and writer. Hi, Ava, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you. um, we're meeting, and I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on uh, the Kulin Nation, and that our conversation is taking on place on stolen land, and that um, the place in which our relationship has blossomed and the minds that we've created to kind of have this discussion has taken on has happened on Aboriginal land. So yeah, starting with that is always pertinent and good.
Yeah,
As
absolutely.
I like
Uh,
subtly move myself around my screen. Yeah.
I,
Hi.
I realized I pressed a different button as well, so now we've got a different layout than how I practiced it. Hang
All
on, let me
good.
try to smush us together.
Ah,
There you go.
beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge. It's also, this is a digital event. It's happening and being live streamed to everywhere in the world. But asking, whose country are you on, is such a pertinent question because we need to be listening to First Nations people, especially in these times. But I mean, always when thinking about our role in colonization and the way in which creating work on stolen, unceded land affects both that work and the creative process itself.
Definitely. There's something about producing things in digital space where there is a tendency, um, not in this particular situation, but a tendency for people to uh, think of themselves as isolated individuals that don't have, sovereign access in the world, or that the fact that something is occurring in a digital space means that it isn't tied to a physical location from whence it's made, kind of thing. Which, on the one hand, can be kind of interesting for certain ideas. For instance, if you're making work that's like science fiction or something really wild like that. But yeah, it is actually it informs everything. Yeah.
I feel like there's one vision of a digital utopia where we shed our bodies, we are the pure data forms. There is no place, there is no time. And then there's this like reality that I firmly believe in, which is that we are dirt and that we, we have to localize and understand that there is no such thing as the unbiased, apolitical, magical digital space outside of reality.
Yeah.
Um, Rather it becomes like an extension, a trajectory of desire, an avatar, a manifestation of the real world.
Mm.
Not to say that it itself is not real, but is just another type of reflection. And
Yeah.
asking
And
those questions and interrogating, like, yeah, who owns this space, who gets to be playing in it.
yeah, it's a uh, in one sense it's about like the internet is still a market and we're still operating in a market in a way, and that doesn't disappear all of a sudden just because it's like digital and holograms and stuff. Yeah.
Welcome to the marketplace of ideas.
Yes, the great digital landscape that we see before us.
So, I wanted to dive into a few questions. You are a musician and a writer, and the particular type of music that you have an interest in is pop music.
Yes.
Uh, why? I say
Yeah,
that really derisively. Why?
I really like pop music because of a couple of reasons. Firstly, is that uh, it is mechanically, I think that pop music is trying to have the most affect on an audience in the tightest and most constraint parameters. So, you've got like 2 minutes 30 to guide people through an entire story, an entire, emotional arc, have it be really beautiful and polished and execute it like that and have it be catchy. It's a very challenging form. And another reason why it's so challenging is that I think that what part of what is essential to a lot of pop music is that it needs to have widespread appeal. So it's that thing of, for example, there are certain texts that explain really complicated ideas, but in this really beautiful, accessible manner. And I think that pop music can often do that in the realm of sound and sonics. But also, pop music is not just sound, it's also writing. Um, and it's also like it also, there's a canon of pop music and bits and pieces like that. So you're trying to produce all these things, writing, lyrics, melodies, aesthetics that surround the sound itself within really like constrained, tight time frames. And for some reason, I really like that challenge. I find it really interesting. Yeah, that's part of what makes me really interested in pop music. I might
Mm.
read some actually. I think that could be cool at some point. Maybe read something that I'm writing or something at some point.
Yeah, yeah, please do. I mean,
Yeah,
if you have a reflection on pop music.
yeah. Um, well, it as in like a written piece that's a reflection on pop music. Is that
Oh,
what you mean?
whatever it is that you wanted to read out,
Oh,
basically.
sure. Okay. Um, give me. Oh, I should have had this already.
That's totally fine.
Mm,
Feel free to look into that. I'm
well,
interested. Okay, when I think about
oh yeah, you go.
when I think about pop music, I'm thinking about, yeah, the constraints that make it. As you pointed out, there's some genre constraints about what
Mm,
constitutes it from an aesthetic perspective, but those don't come out of the blue. They're all very
mm,
finely tuned to the marketplace, linking nicely to our marketplace of ideas.
yeah.
And so, you know, that
Yeah.
marketplace more than ever is being determined kind of algorithmically.
Yeah.
Our taste is being made on Spotify. Our culture and our desires towards what kind of pop music is acceptable at any given time is decided by the AI of capitalism, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, how does that bear? What's the relationship then between the artist who wants to be authentic and the capital machine that wants to churn out the hit?
Yeah. I think that uh, there isn't much of a difference, and that it's next to impossible to separate the two. To add to the Spotify and the algorithms that are shaping taste, there's also with TikTok, like songs are also getting shrunk into like 5 second snippets that are recognizable. So pop songs are being reduced to hooks. So writers like myself are in many ways becoming irrelevant. I mean, writers are always going to be around and be useful in some way, but you know, there are just these like sharp, snappy, um, sharp and snappy little snippets that are so hooky and catchy and play in your mind and go and spread like wildfire. I think that a conversation about authenticity and the inauthenticity of algorithms and mechanics relates specifically to a producer named Sophie, whose entire work, Sophie, Sophie, she's a producer and a musician, and her entire aesthetic is about the inauthenticity and the plasticness of pop music. And part of her exploration is in relation to the expansiveness of being transgender. So she's like, bodies are doing weird fucking things by like normative standards in that same way that you can embrace a expansive representation of gender, whether that's the way that you're modifying your body, or whether that's the way that you're changing the way that you want to be perceived and presented in the world. Pop music, if you can embrace that artificiality, you can make really interesting ideas. That's a paraphrasing of what Sophie has said, but I have a similar opinion on that. I think it's really interesting. Uh, and you can also be conscious and mindful of the fact that, you know, like pop music exists in an entirely deregulated music industry. Everyone except for a very small amount of people are treated terribly when it comes to economic outcomes and also cultural exploitation, and there's all this trash happening as well, and some good hooks come out of it. It's very stressful.
And some good hooks. Right. Yeah, I like this identification of like pop songs are getting reduced. If pop songs themselves are a type of reduction that caters to our processing fluency, to our immediate taste, um,
Mm,
and like there's a taste making thing there, but there's also a reflection. I guess like to narrow that even further into a TikTok to get into a single hook feels like the natural progression.
progression, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that from that point, I think that popular culture is often hyper oppositional. For example, in the early 2010s, this is my own observation, the early 2010s and the late noughties saw the explosion of music videos, 6-minute extravaganzas on YouTube, and that has been reduced significantly. My understanding of the music industry is that artists are getting a lot less leverage out of those expansive, huge pop music videos. And now what is really popular is like 30-second, here's a dance that you can reproduce on TikTok. Here's a 30-second snippet of video that will play
that can then
behind.
get stolen and put into Fortnite.
Yeah, exactly. And people don't get paid. Yeah. Once again. But I'd like to relate that idea to something that we were just talking about, which I'm about to circle back to. Let's continue and I'll get back to my point.
Yeah, that's totally
I'm just
fine.
so
It's also
excited.
fine if we don't end up circle around.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much in this. Okay, so you're also a writer and you're interested in interviews. You've done a bunch of interviews with people before, but you mentioned to me that this is actually your first time being interviewed.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on how interview processes should go, and what interviewer? This is such a bad question, right? It's like, what should an interviewer be asking of their subject?
Sure. I'll start with a really specific question, a specific answer, uh, which is something that just I went and saw an author for the Melbourne Writers Festival, and they were an international author. Their name is Alexander Chee, and something that was mentioned to me after the interview was the idea that if you're a person who is peddling a product, for example, a book or a record or something like that, if someone is at that level, then a really interesting thing to do is to ask something that is unrelated to that product that they're there to sell, that's maybe related to something in their past, that's maybe related to something that, someone has squirreled through their Wikipedia page to find and to bring up this really great story of sorts. That's one way that I think that an interview can be really interesting and dynamic. The other way is that I think that empathy and care goes hand in hand with a good conversation, and a good conversation that is paragraphed well, that is controlled, so that both the people having the conversation and the audience listening can keep up. That empathy and that paragraphing, I think, can produce really beautiful results. There's something in that about, it's a balance of control and direction and play and, letting people be really open and flowy. Because if you're too flowy, then it's no one knows what's going on. And if you're too controlled, then you're Mr. Roboto, and, you can make a pop song out of that, but not an interview.
Maybe that's what we'll emerge with at the end of this.
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned playfulness, because to me, conversations are at their best very playful. It's an attitudinal navigation where you're working together towards creating a fun and engaging experience. And in this case, hopefully not just for ourselves, but for other people.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's
tricky
sorry,
things. I think is
you go.
This lag is so. That's the other thing. Like creating a conversation online when there's a lot of lag ruins any sense of pacing of what a normal conversation should feel like. And I'm still getting used to that. Like, oh, I have to pause for extra long after my sentences, and half the time I'm not even asking questions. I'm just giving a sentence.
I gotcha.
You've done a bunch of writing of these interviews, and you've also written about everything from pop music to kitsch aesthetics and ethics. What is your creative process for writing like?
Okay. So I recently did a artist residency at a space called Testing Grounds, which is behind the Arts Centre. It's in the city for 7 months. And it was my first ever art residency. It was the biggest, creative opportunity of my creative journey so far. And a huge, huge thing that I learned throughout that experience was starting to pin down a process of uh, sorry, excuse me. One of the big things that I learned from that process, from that residency, was what it takes to be productive when you're doing creative work, being able to produce creative work at scale. And I'm the kind of person that often has roundabout ways of getting to the answer. So part of my writing process, I've realized, is actually like things like going to the gym and doing like heaps of exercise to get my brain in a particular place, and eating content voraciously when I'm in the mood to do that, whether it's an article of some kind or a certain type of music. I have Frank Ocean released this like super expensive, gigantic, full page, glossy, beautiful magazine a couple of years ago. And I scroll through that sometimes as well, just to get like a hit of some kind. You mentioned that, yeah, I've written about things like kitsch ethics, kitsch aesthetics, pop music. And I think the through line of both of them, which has been unintentional, is that I'm really interested in affect. I'm really interested in producing affect in an audience and really viscerally experienced things, whether that is aesthetics or music and bits and pieces like that. So my creative process when it comes to writing is about a type of fitness. It is about really consuming like visceral content and then pushing myself to write digitally on the keyboard as well as on paper and pen, the ideas that I have, doing mind maps, writing a lot, having conversations with people about my ideas, and from there, hopefully eking out a couple of words and making something happen. One of my biggest issues as a writer is hitting word counts and producing words to a certain amount. It's always been a
I'm
problem for me.
really
Yeah.
glad you said that, because most writers, they're like, oh, I couldn't cull it down. I wrote 3 billion words over the word limit. And
No.
I just have no resonance with that. It's like extracting teeth for me. Um,
Same.
okay, I'm
Yeah.
interested in the articulation of the through line, which is affect, and the way that images or themes or music, whatever it might be, affects us and people. Because the examples in kitsch aesthetics, you had the example of um, like Saddam's Hussein's
Victory arches.
swords, the victory arches, right,
Yeah.
which were exported to Europe in terms of workload because they couldn't produce
Yeah.
it locally,
Yeah.
which just reminds me of that, Trumpian creating a reality, delivering on something using totally antithetical means. Um,
Yeah.
as well as the Twin Towers, which is such a startling and lovely contrast.
Mm.
How are those things like pop music?
Yeah. Okay. How are they like that? I love questions like that.
It's a
Um,
bit left field.
because no, but I kind of think in that way I kind of think in that way, in that the well the essay that we're referring to, which is an essay called Two Twins, which was published in On Magazine edition 13.1, that I wrote, is the two things that I compare are Saddam Hussein's Twin Towers, Twin Arches, and the Twin Towers, particularly the Twin Towers in a state of disrepair and destruction. I think that Saddam Hussein's Twin Arches present a highly specifically pivoted story about a singular man and a singular vision that is in so many ways fabricated. And the destruction of the Twin Towers was the beginning of a massive, of course, destruction of the Twin Towers leads to a complete entire reckoning and like seismic shake of the 2 decades that have occurred since the September 11 attacks. They are flashpoints of information and flashpoints of super widespread, though less widespread naturally in Saddam Hussein's victory arches, but for the populace of Iraq, Iran, the region, super widespread. Both the Twin Towers and the Twin Arches were widespread, highly particular in their state of being, and in that way catchy. And those are similar to elements of pop music in their widespreadness and, their,
Right, they're
yeah.
purposely constructed. They're designed to be mimetic. They captured this massive audience on mostly national lines.
Mm.
I can't help but think about the comparisons too. I guess I was going to pull out Carly Rae Jepsen specifically, but just like pop music and the way that it tries to do
Yeah.
those same things.
Yeah. I think that what I do across the work is that I delineate that they may have structural, the way that they're structured can be similar, but they're still, the weight of the Twin Towers and of Saddam Hussein's victory arches is not the weight of pop music. And the negative impacts of how pop music operates in the music industry, in that deregulated industry that we were talking about earlier, that impact is very different to a dictator's, you know, self-aggrandizing art projects and such. And I love in discussions, and I think it comes from people. I think it comes often from people of color and or people that have experiences that make them wake up, in a sense, to put it kind of shortly, is that people like us don't stop at the look at my interesting mind game. Oh, like pop music. Look how interesting it is. These things have real consequences. They're living, breathing impacts, ricocheting impacts in the world across space and time and such. And that's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
So okay, the gravitas of the, I mean, yeah, it's almost a too grim a comparison to have made so flippantly. But on one hand, we recognize exactly what you're saying, that like both of these things can have massive impacts on society in different spheres in different ways, right?
Mm.
Whether it be the ways in which a nation commemorates an event or a leader, or the way in which pop music influences and kind of changes the mind or the taste of an entire nation. I Obviously there is a distinction between those things, but we can look at pop music and say, well, this is designed for a particular moment in time. We can look at it as a cultural artifact in the same lens.
Yeah.
So it feels really fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the comparison, uh, is there, and it's definitely possible to be made. And that I think that conversations like this can, we're able to go to we're able to access the depth and subtlety that's required to really pull out the gravity of those comparisons, kind of thing. Yeah. Does that make
So
sense?
in the comparison, yeah, pop music is fluffy, right? And it's like seems almost like a trivial thing to be focused on. Um, it's often derided because it's not high art.
And because
Do you have
it's
any?
feminine, I think.
And because it's feminine. Can you tell me more
Yeah.
about, yeah, the ways in which it is
Yeah.
negatively construed in this way?
I think that part of pop, well, I think that contemporary art criticism, music criticism, takes pop music very seriously. A lot of it does, when the institutions that produce that criticism, or the independent publishers that are making that criticism, are not controlled by dominant cultural perspectives, or aren't controlled predominantly by men or masculine people. I think that pop music, in fact, says so much about the state of where we are because it's so widespread. But on the one hand, its widespreadness leads people to think that it is worthless because it can be had by so many people. I think that is an element of it. And in many engagements with pop music, there is this idea of a lack of agency of the pop star. Pop music is not necessarily being made with pop stars. It never really has only been being made with pop stars, but the majority of pop stars within various pop music canons have been groups of people, or they have been singular women, cis women predominantly. And as a result of that focus, and also the highly aesthetic nature of pop music, I think uh, there is a misogynistic through line of engaging with pop music that still exists today. Because, yeah, the majority of people who are the face of pop music are femme and feminine. Yeah.
Yeah, that is something I hadn't really reflected on before, but it is true. Like when I think about who enjoys pop music, I'm immediately imagining like women or queer men, I guess,
Yeah.
as the stereotype at least.
Yeah, and it's firstly from that stereotype comes really interesting work, and uh, and secondly, I think that key to the key flaw in that type of analysis of pop music is assuming that the principal artist or the principal face of the pop music has no agency. And sometimes it's demonstrable that they don't have agency. And sometimes it's the case that the veneer, it is so tightly orchestrated and so tightly executed, and you can't have that type of execution that like lands so perfectly without someone, the principal person, being in like, this is what's up and this is how we're going to go, and we're going to get this team in, and here is this and here is that, and we're going to, you know, move it all in. I have an anecdote about this very action, and it's about Beyonce. It's like an insider tip.
Oh,
I'm not legally signing off. I've heard this from a reliable source, but often when quite a reliable source, like I trust this person, or else I wouldn't be bringing it up in this conversation. But um, uh, you know, often when Beyonce and her team will be starting a new project, there will be something akin to a type of Beyonce idol, where, you know, people across sound design, set design, like directors, filmographers, everyone is like, they're reached out to and they say, look, Beyonce's working on a new thing, show us what you've got. And Beyonce signs off on every piece of the entire project, is across every single part of that really complicated structure. That kind of links back to the beginning of our conversation about the economy of pop music, in that to produce a work of that level, that's an organization, that's a company. That's the same thing, I think, bureaucratically, as to produce a huge body of work like a giant pop album, as there is to create, you know, to build a company or
a
something like
bridge.
that. Yeah, like yeah, it's, yeah, it's just think that aesthetic is interesting and weird and artificial and bullshit and awesome. Yeah. Can I touch on just quickly a lyric that I really love?
Yeah, please. I
Um,
was going to ask if you wanted to read anything out.
yeah. So this is not written by myself. This is from an album that I discovered just a couple of months ago. I believe it came out in 2019 by an artist named Caroline Polachek. And it's from a song called "Hit Me Where It Hurts." And the first couple of lyrics go, "I'm feeling like a butterfly trapped inside a plane. Maybe there's something going on. I'm not insane. If I'm already out of time, then make it worse. Go on and hit me in the heart. Hit me where it hurts." I think that's really good. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation. If I had the capacity, I would then like play it as our outro and
Yeah, we could
probably
write.
violate a bunch of copyright laws.
Yeah,
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 exactly. You just have to imagine it, or like go to another YouTube window and quickly type it in. Hit me where it
yeah.
hurts. Um, Ava, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you about all these things. Thank you so much for coming onto the distillery.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. I had so much fun. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm so glad. This is the distillery, and thanks so much for tuning in. You can follow Ava at his Instagram at ALUMIED. And you can follow Distillery at distillery.site or on Twitter at distillery_site or our website, distillery.site. Join us again tomorrow. We've got new episodes streaming every single day. Thanks so much, everyone. Cue outro music.